You're listening to the podcast of the Economic Society at George Mason University. The Economic Society is a registered student organization that is committed to guiding students, organizing events, and provoking discussion. I'm Carlos Borgert, president of the Economic Society and the host of this conversation. We're with Bryan Caplan, professor of economics here at George Mason and New York Times bestselling author.
Yeah, second time we've heard that.
Yeah. Did you go through a full bio?
Yeah, close enough.
Close enough? All right. Rational voter, selfish reasons to have more kids, case against education, open borders, labor econ versus the world, how evil are politicians, and don't be a feminist. And he has a new book coming out in 2023 called Build, Baby, Build, The Science and Ethics of Housing. So he's all over the place. You published in a lot of outlets. You appear on a lot of media, a lot of podcasts. You're everywhere.
All right.
But tonight, this evening, you're with us. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. The last line in your official bio says that you're an openly nerdy man who loves role-playing games and graphic novels.
That's correct.
And you live in Oakton, Virginia with your wife and your four kids.
Yep.
All very lovely people. I've met them all. I'm huge fans of the Caplan family.
Right. Thank you.
Your very first comic book is a story set in Italy. What is the story behind that? Why did you do that?
All right, so this is a book that has been storyboarded but hasn't been drawn. Really what happened was, almost 15 years ago, I got this comics editing software, and I said, I just sort of want to play around with it. You were mentioning role-playing games. There was a superhero mystery set in Verona, Italy that I had written, and I had originally done it as a game, but I just got the idea of what if I go and try using Google Images to storyboard it and write the script, and then maybe one day I will go and hire an artist to go and draw it for me. So it's called Amore Infernale, Infernal Love. And let's see, it won't be giving away too much to tell you what the real story of it is. There's suicides that are happening in Verona. If you've ever been there, there's these bridges you can jump off of. Don't, but anyway. And finally, when the mystery gets unraveled, it turns out that the true story of Romeo and Juliet is not what you have heard. The real story is that Romeo and Juliet had a suicide pact, and Romeo broke it at the last minute. Juliet carried it out, and she went straight to where Catholics say you go when you commit suicide, which is hell. Right? Romeo died of a broken heart and becomes a ghost haunting the city of Verona, doomed to repeat the tragic sequence. But centuries ago, an exorcist came and put him down into his grave temporarily, so that's okay. But now, fast forward to modern day, there's an Italian-American composer who comes to Verona. He needs an idea for his opera, but he can't think of one. He's blocked. So he consults the dark magic, and guess who he manages to contact in the netherworld to give him inspiration for his opera? The devil Juliet, who has risen through the centuries up to the ranks of hell and is now an important person in hell. And and so she teaches him how to cancel the exorcism on Romeo and bring him back so that he can go and follow the ghost of Romeo through Verona, watch him fall in love, and bring the various love affairs to suicide, and from that he gets inspiration for his opera. And our heroes have to figure out what's really going on. And then the final act, what happens is that the opera isn't just an opera called Amore Infernale, Infernal Love. The opera, once it has been hummed enough times by people around the world, releases Juliet from hell to get her revenge. So it's the first time I've ever been asked about that in an interview. But actually, a couple years ago, I went and did an art contest on the internet and to go and get someone to illustrate this. And I found someone who was fantastic, totally unknown guy living in the mountains of the Philippines. And his art was so good. I just couldn't believe what a great job he did. And he said, "This is going to change my life. It's so wonderful." And I was happy to go and pay him the money, even if no one ever read it. And then turned out he was a tormented artist, and even though it seemed like he would be working on this night and day, he just gave up. And then I was like, oh, God, no. And I tried many times to get him to restart, but he said he doesn't want to do it now. So in principle, I might go and try to find a different artist to go and draw it. It's just that he was doing such a great job that now it hurts me to see anyone else do it. So I was planning actually on putting up the incomplete version because he got like 30 pages done and they're just so good, which it's like, man, why can't he just finish? Why not? You know, you probably never heard this, but some artists can be unreliable. So that's the story of Amore Infernale.
Are there no like broader themes in economics that we can tell, or was it just written for the love of storytelling?
I mean, honestly, when I write fiction, I do a lot of fiction, almost always for role-playing games. All of my fiction is fundamentally fiction for fiction's sake. I don't like didactic fiction, but still, the people that know my stories will say that there are a bunch of running themes that seem to go through. It's like one of them is the evil of communism just comes up a great deal. And it's like, well, it just so happened that was, for the 17th time, the perfect villain in the story. Right, so there's that. Let's see. Someone else just said, there's always a fanatic in your stories. And I'm like, well, I mean, wouldn't that make sense that there would be such a person in every story? Really drives the story forward if there's someone who has some strange view that they really believe in. So let's see. I guess in the case of Amore Infernale, you might bookend that with my new Don't Be a Feminist, because there is an element of Juliet is there to go and preach hostile and angry feminism to the world, and Romeo has to explain, look, it wasn't that I didn't love you, it was that I couldn't break my mother's heart. And when he gives the speech on Italian television, then we see, well, he's winning over the mothers of Italy. He wasn't the bad guy that Juliet assumed that he was. So there is that. But basically, it's just a story that I thought was really fun to do.
Mm-hmm. Another comic book series that I thought of recently, because you tweeted this out. Mm-hmm. You and your family dressed up as characters from the Watchmen franchise for Halloween.
That's true. Yeah, that was like 7 Halloweens ago, but I was Ozymandias. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What did we learn about you from the fact that you did that?
Well, I mean, big nerd, obviously. Since you already said that I'm a fan of graphic novels, like if you don't like The Watchmen, can you really call yourself a fan of graphic novels? It's not easy to do so. That was actually the first graphic novel I ever read. A friend of mine gave it to me for, I think, my 20th birthday. Because I basically didn't read comics when I was a kid. They were too expensive, and the library hardly had any selection, so I just didn't do it. But then he went and gave me Watchmen. Back in those days, it was very hard to get graphic novels from the library either. Now, if you go over to Mason, they've got a fantastic graphic novel collection, so you can just go and catch up. But once I got a job as a professor, I actually did have some spending money. And since you couldn't get graphic novels from the library, I just started buying graphic novels, so I got a pretty good collection there. But in terms of what else you can get out of Watchmen, let's see. I guess the main thing, maybe the most popular Twitter poll I ever did was who was the real hero of Watchmen. And there's a bunch of different options. And in the comments, there's a whole bunch of very superior people saying, do not say Rorschach. Anyone who says Rorschach didn't understand the story. Alan Moore specifically said Rorschach is not the hero. It's like, yeah, but maybe he didn't understand his own book that well. Maybe the book has gotten away from the author, and we could still argue about this. Yeah, definitely. The fact that you can argue about who the hero is fun. The people say that you can't argue about it because Alan Moore said that there is no hero. Well, that is a view of the book. It's not very entertaining, and of course, the point of fiction is entertainment, right? Let's see. I like a rich, intricate story. I like great characterization. I like the art of the book. So those are all pretty obvious things. But I would say that to like it is really just to make me a typical fan of graphic novels, because it actually is the #1 bestseller in graphic novels on a typical day on Amazon. So people have been trying for 30 years to go and write new stuff, and then sometimes it gets the #1 slot, and then it disappears, and then Watchmen comes back up to #1. See, did my thing just fall?
It might have fallen. That's okay.
Let's see. Where did it? Yeah, it fell.
Oh, okay. We're all good?
Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned communism earlier. You've curated the Museum of Communism on the internet.
Yes.
How did you go about doing that?
Honestly, I haven't written anything on it for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. But when I was in grad school, I did some very bad career moves, like put a lot of time into hobbies instead of trying to publish. Worked out fine for me, but I have a big interest in the history of communism and know that it's not very well understood, so I just started working on that. I'm happy with what I did 20, 25 years ago. I haven't put much more time into it. If I was going to do something, I would probably do something different. Maybe I'd even do a graphic novel on the history of communism. That would probably be the best way to get people to actually learn it. One more regular book about communism I don't think is going to make much of a splash at this point, but perhaps a really good nonfiction graphic novel on it might get people's attention. So I don't know, maybe it's a good idea. Maybe I should try that.
Why do you think communism has such an invincible brand? It seems like we keep trying to kill it, but it keeps coming back.
Yeah, it's a good question. So in my book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, I talk about the fundamental economic biases of people that have never studied economics. Because here's something you might have noticed in your study of economics. People who have never studied economics are rarely agnostic. If you mention you study economics, they don't just say, wow, that's a subject I know nothing about and have no opinions on. Tell me what I should think. Instead, the normal thing for people who have never studied economics, for example, is to be convinced that protectionism is great. That's my dad, for example. My dad has long believed that we could solve all of America's economic problems with a naval blockade of Japan, or maybe actually now China, or just all of Asia. You don't know what new bad thing will come out of Asia, blockade the whole continent, combined with a Berlin Wall at the Mexican border. Right? And it's not like my dad has read the textbook and said there's an error. He just feels in his guts that that's the best way of doing things. And the fact that his son is a PhD and disagrees does not bother him at all, not in the slightest. Right. So now one of the main economic biases I talk about in that book is what I call anti-market bias. It's a general tendency to underestimate the social benefits of markets, to assume the worst. Because someone has greedy intentions, then there's going to be a bad social result. I think this is a very standard natural human reaction. It's what people think who have not studied economics. If you go and read Aristotle, say, it's like, obviously interest is a terrible thing. We all can tell this. It's like, why is it obvious? Someone who needs money now makes a deal with someone who has money now that they don't need to go and have it now when they need it and then pay back some extra later on. Seems mutually beneficial. And like, oh, sure, right. Oh, yeah, we're really supposed to believe that. Yeah, that you really should believe that story. All right, so anti-market bias is very deeply ingrained, so I think it makes sense that there would be political movements that would try to cash in on it and would center their whole worldview around it. And communism really is one where hostility to markets is the very core of the doctrine. So I think that's the main thing that's going on with it, is that you take this fundamental human flaw of being unreasonably pessimistic about markets and then you turn it into the core of your political religion. So I think that is why it has such great legs. Again, you guys are, like, almost all of you are too young to remember actual communism. There's many, so at the time when it was around, there were enough very ugly things about it to turn people away from it. Though honestly, I would say that what really upset people about communism the most was the hypocrisy. There's a communist dictator talking about how he loves the poor, but he has 20 mansions. Right? What did not seem to bother people nearly as much as this is an economic theory that brings countries into poverty. Right? And worse. Right? So if you know the real history of communism, early on in the history of most communist regimes, the government says we need to take the peasants' land away from them so that we can have government-owned farming. And that almost always leads to a horrible famine, which leads to mass death. And when people resist, you kill them for that too. But this is something that hardly anybody knows outside of a communist country. But anyway, this is, again, very closely tied to the hostility to markets. We can't have anyone here running their own business, trying to make money. We can't trust that. That's dangerous. So that is a very common expression of what communist regimes actually do. And then you pile that on. Sort of the core of communism is the extreme anti-market bias combined with fanaticism. Right now, there are fanatics for every view, but if your view is not that bad, being fanatical about it isn't that bad. Like if you're a fanatic about doing your exercise every day, all right, you're not going to be murdering people over that. I hope, probably not. It's like he got in the way, he got in between me and my gym, he had to die. All right, that's not going to happen. But if your fanaticism is no one should be able to make money selling anything, then yeah, you're going to need to rule with fire and blood. But that is the kind of thing that turns people away from it. But at the same time, the reaction is, well, like such wonderful ideals, too bad that they were not implemented well. Right? So anytime you base your whole worldview around something that sounds very idealistic to a lot of people, it's hard for you to ever really be fully ruined by it because the fallback is it was bad people that messed up a great idea.
Was Marx well-intentioned? Should we give him credit for that?
No. Marx was a terrible human being on almost any measure. But just as an intellectual, I'd say that when you are an intellectual, like, there are professional responsibilities that go along with being an intellectual, like staying calm and listening to people that don't agree with you so that you don't get totally wrong. Like, if you're not willing to do that, you don't belong in this business. That's like being a doctor who's just going to do amputations for the fun of it without seeing whether a person needs the amputation, which normally you don't, by the way. So anytime anyone talks about amputation, whoa, probably not. Yeah, so Marx was, as I think you can tell from reading almost any page of his work, he was a narrow-minded fanatic. He was someone who had no interest in actually calming down and wondering whether there might be some mistakes in the work. He's what you might call a Gnostic thinker, like, oh, I've got it all figured out, and anyone who disagrees with me, I've got a theory that explains why I don't have to listen to you. Yes, that is a big part of Marxism, is someone makes an argument, well, that's just bourgeois economics. That's just bourgeois philosophy. That is the kind of philosophy that a person like you would have, of course. Obviously, anyone who grows up in a bourgeois society, in a bourgeois home, is going to think that total nonsense. I don't have to listen. It's like, well, Carl, you grew up in a bourgeois home. It's like, well, I escaped from it, but not you, obviously. So, yeah, I mean, it's a body of dogmatic and emotional, fanatical work, which I think it is the product of someone who was just deeply intellectually negligent. So, I don't think that he was well-intentioned in that way. Just as in purely intellectual grounds, I think he's just totally negligent. This is not what anyone who wants to get to the truth ought to be doing. Basically, you ought to be doing the opposite of that. Right? And again, you can just read the level of invective and insults and ad hominem attack that he just piles on, calling people that he doesn't like vampires and werewolves. He really does. If I'm a vampire, I'm a werewolf. So it's like, you're sort of like like an unhinged person on Twitter, but much more verbose, though. He did write a lot. In terms of, if you had any doubt, you can just look at his personal life and see that he was, let's see, a highly exploitative human being. He wrote a lot about exploitation, and he did know a lot about it because that's the way that he treated other people around him. He sponged off of his buddy Engels, who really didn't have a job. He neglected his family. When he did come into money, there was inheritance. He went and blew it all on some wild parties, even though he had people in his immediate family who were malnourished and otherwise really could have used the money. But that kind of an impulsive, emotional person that you really just want to avoid, honestly. But don't marry someone like this. And just since he did engage in ad hominem, there is the most notorious fact, which is now acknowledged by anyone who knows his biography. He did actually, what's the right way of putting this? One way or another, he impregnated their maid, and then he got Friedrich Engels to pretend to be the father to deal with some of the awkwardness at home. So there is a letter from Marx to Engels saying, "Friend, I have some news for you about yourself." But again, I would say the main thing is just to judge him as a very low-quality intellectual, which is not to say that there aren't a lot of people in the same boat. There are, right? So there's just a lot of deeply emotional, fanatical people who ought to do a totally different line of work. Like the kind of person, if he wrote fiction, that would be a lot better. Right? In fiction, it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, it just has to be entertaining. But if you're doing scholarship, then there's a higher bar. Like, you've got to get it right, or else bad stuff can come out of it.
Mm-hmm. You have a quote from Leo Tolstoy in your email sign off. I just want to know the story behind it. I'm going to read it out. From War and Peace. He looked at the approaching Frenchmen, and although only a moment before he had been galloping after these Frenchmen in order to hack them down, their closeness now seemed so terrible to him that he could not believe his eyes. Who are they? Why are they running? Could it be after me? Are they running after me? Why? To kill me? Me, whom everybody loves? Why do you have that in your email?
Well, so I am a big fan of Tolstoy, who did write fantastic fiction. That particular quote, to me, it captures the fundamental egotism of almost all human beings. and just the way that our view of ourselves is distorted by the fact that we tend to be around people who think well of us. And so, of course, sometimes you don't have that, and even the people you know well are treating you badly, and you've got to get out of that situation. But most people, they have some people around them who say, oh, you're great, you're so right, you're so wonderful. And then when you step back and say, yeah, but does everybody think that? It's like, of course not. Actually, it's only a very tiny number of people who think so well of you. So probably I put it in there partly just to warn myself against my own arrogance and just tendency to regular human weakness. I mean, I'll just confess, one of my lifelong character flaws is arrogance. I can't remember a time in my life when I didn't feel really great about myself. Right? And like on the one hand, it's motivating, right? It's like, well, I'm so great, I have to do great stuff. But on the other hand, it's like, could this lead you to treat other people badly? As well, if I'm so great, then other people should just be really happy with however I treat them. Probably not, right? And so it's there to sort of to remind me about flaws of human nature, and I think it's also just a very funny line. So I think it's very relatable, right? So if you, on the one hand, if you were on a battlefield, there'd probably be some people trying to kill you, and yet be like, but everybody loves me. Why would they be after me of all people? It's like, well, they don't know. They've never heard of you. That's why. You just seem to be just a regular person in the wrong uniform to them. So of course they're going to try to kill you.
I mean, talking about how great you are, your betting record is 23-0.
Yeah, that is true.
So you've won 23 bets, and you've lost none.
Congrats.
Publicly.
Public
bets.
Public bets.
Why haven't you lost any? What makes you so good at them?
Right. So partly I think I've gotten somewhat lucky. Right. There was one bet that I actually almost lost. We can talk about that if you want to. But it's true. The main thing that I do is I just look for people who are shooting their mouths off and making exaggerated, hyperbolic claims that I think are highly unlikely to be true. And then I challenge them to go and bet on what they're saying. Usually they run for the hills because they in their hearts also know that what they're saying is not really likely to be true. But there are some people who do not realize how hyperbolic and emotional they are being, and they will stand by very odd claims about what's going to happen. And then I bet them, and I've beaten them 23 times. I mean, the one that I almost lost, there's a book called, I think it's America Alone by Mark Stein. Anyway, in this book, published around 2003, he says the European Union is on the verge of collapse. And I read it a few years later, and I said, tell you what, Mark, I bet you that not a single country in the European Union with a population of over 10 million will leave by January 1st, 2020. And he took the bet. All right. Now, I gave him terms much better than he ought to have gotten based upon his claims. He was saying total collapse in a few years. But that's what you do when you want to get a person to bet, is you entice them with favorable terms saying, this is something way weaker than what you're claiming. All right. Now, at first, it looked like Greece was going to leave, and I'm checking the population of Greece, and it's like 10.01 million people. Like, damn it! But then nothing happened with Greece, and in hindsight, it made a lot of sense because Greece would only lose money by leaving, right? The countries that would want Greece to leave were the other countries in the EU who would have a reason to kick them out. But then I looked, and oh yeah, the EU has no provision for expulsion whatsoever. There is no way to kick anyone out of the EU. I did meet an EU expert who said, no, yes, they do. And then I double-checked. No, they really don't. There's nothing they can do. Then, of course, there was Brexit. 2016, there were some people immediately said, declare defeat. And I'm saying, like, the bet says officially leave. They're still on the website. They haven't officially left. I will pay when they are no longer on the website. Right? And then, as you might remember, it just got stretched out for year after year after year, which, by the way, people said, were you thinking that could happen? I'm like, hell yeah, I was thinking that could happen. That's why I put in the word officially leaves. Because I said, look, there could be all kinds of vague movements towards leaving, but that's very different from really pulling the trigger. And then there were like 3 extensions, and the last extension took me over the finish line. So I still won that one, but that was darn close. But what I will say is that fit the pattern of me betting people making exaggerated hyperbolic claims that turned out to be, and were foreseeably wrong. And yeah, it's nowhere close to that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Mm-hmm. So one of your big theories that you've kind of like built your brand on the last 10-ish years college is just signaling. The value of a college degree is just signaling. When did you come to that realization? Was that when you were in college? You were looking around and thinking, there's no way this is actually worth all this money.
Yeah, so I never say just signaling. So you're in my class. Yes, mostly. I'll say 80%. I've had so many people who've actually said, well, you say it's all signaling, but what about reading? You've ever thought of that, have you? And like, I know about reading. And I agree, and I read it, and I say it 50 times in the book. It's not all signaling. It's a very high level of signaling. When I actually came to this idea, I will honestly say that this is one of the very few ideas I've had for a really long time. I started wondering about what in the world was going on with education in kindergarten because it's weird. Like, why are you making me learn this stuff? Like, why? Like, why do I have to go and learn that? Right? And I would go and ask adults, and they would say, well, you have to learn it so you can do well in school, so you can get a good job. That seemed like a pretty good answer as far as it went, right? Because, all right, most of the people that I know have good jobs did well in school. All right, I guess I'll keep doing it. But it still is puzzling. Yeah, but why do you need to get this stuff to go do a good job, to get a good job? So I'd say this was really in the back of my mind from like the age of about 5. And then when I was in junior high, that's when I think I came up with a very crude version of the signaling story of saying, well, if you don't do it, then people think badly of you because you're saying something bad about yourself. And it really did have a big effect on the way that I worked as a student because any class that I didn't think that was interesting to me and that I didn't think I need to know later on in life, I just tried to get the lowest A I could. So just do the least amount of work because my school did not have minuses or pluses. So just get right over the edge of the B because I'm never going to need to know this stuff again. And that's how it worked. Spanish, for example, I had to do 3 years just to be eligible to apply to a University of California school. And then when do you need to know this stuff ever again? You don't. So, yeah. Then when I got to college, that's when I actually found out that there were some economists that had already thought about this a lot more than I had. And then I said, okay, great. So I'm not alone here. There's some very smart people there. I don't think any of them had gotten Nobel Prizes yet by that point, maybe one of them. But there's like 5 different Nobelists who have written something about signaling anyway. I think Michael Spence, where that's the only thing that he got it for, came a bit later. You may say, so then what did you add? Why did you need to write a book? Here's the funny thing. Everybody else who wrote about signaling and was famous got it for the theory. But none of them actually seemed to care about it as a real story about what was going on in the world, and I did. So if you go and read them, there's a lot of math, and maybe this could be true, but none of them seemed to take it very seriously. They sort of just gave birth to the baby and then walked away. Right? And I say, hey, this is a beautiful baby. This baby should be raised to adulthood and be given every advantage and love and birthdays. And that's what I tried to do in the case against education is say, all right, we got this theory here, but why should we believe that it's actually very important in the real world? And I think that book is almost unique in terms of taking it really seriously as an empirical story. It's weird because you think if someone got a Nobel Prize for it, then someone else would have said, and here's the evidence for or against. But the theory was detached enough from the empirical work that didn't happen, and the empirical people in education economics especially just always hated the theory because it sort of invalidates much of their existence. That's anyway my story. They might have, I don't know, what would they say about me? Yeah, I don't know, just like some right-wing ideologue thing. There's a lot of left-wing people believe in signaling too, actually. So it's not really that ideological. It's more of just open your eyes and look what's really going on.
Mm-hmm. So signaling is really important, just in general in life.
Yeah.
Do you ever give the advice that people should just be better dressed? Or just spend a lot on cosmetic surgery?
Well, I have definitely given people advice when they're going into a very particular situation about how they ought to dress. And if you look at me, it's like, who am I to tell someone how they ought to dress?
You're playing the part.
Yes. The answer is, look at how I dress when I give a damn. No offense to you guys, but yeah, I'm not here to go and have you walk away saying, wow, Chloe's such a great dresser, right? But yes, I have had friends who were, I had a student who was in on the job market, and I said, look, all right, do you want me to tell you something that some people might not like to hear, but is important for your future? And he's like, yeah. It's like, shave off your beard. And he's like, my beard going to be a problem? Your beard's going to be a problem. And he might say, that's not fair or whatever. Like, I'm not here to tell you what's fair. I'm here to tell you that you need to take off that beard if you want to get a good job. At least it's worth having a few weeks of not having your ideal facial hair to improve your chances. See, you know, Fabio Rojas, you met him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Fabio Rojas, he's my, he was my best friend from UC Berkeley. He's a sociology professor at Indiana University. When he was about to get married, I went and begged him to get a haircut because he had a ridiculous hairstyle. And I said, your kids are going to be laughing at you for the rest of your life if you get married with that hair. And he just said, I refuse to change it. My hair is beautiful, Bryan. And all right, fine. All right. But at that very moment, I said, all right, fine. Get married in whatever hair you want. But promise me, when you go on the job market in a year, then you'll cut your hair. He's like, of course, I'm not a moron, Bryan. All right, fast forward 1 year. He's on the job market. I'm on the phone. Have you cut your hair? He's like, I'm not cutting my hair. It's beautiful. Like, you promised me you would cut your hair. Do you want to have no job? Do you want to have no money? He's like, oh, no. And then I actually told him, I said, Fab, I am getting down on my knees over the phone and begging you to cut your hair. Do it. And he did cut his hair, and he did get the fantastic job that he's got right now. And in hindsight, I've said, like, do you think it mattered? And he's like, it mattered. Whatever else you've heard about sociology, they're conservative dressers. And so that would have been a problem for him. So, yeah, it's not often, but for cases that count, and if I care about the person, then definitely I will tell them to improve their signal. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, a lot of the signals that people send are less superficial. Things like just not looking people in the eye, not smiling, really basic stuff. A lot of nerdy people, and like I said, openly nerdy men. There's a lot of nerdy people who have bad eye contact, and they don't give a good impression. And I try to tell them, so look, this will be very highly useful to you. Sometimes it's like, well, I know it'll be highly useful, but it would just not be honest. And like, a smile's not a lie. Looking someone in the eye is not a lie. Why can't you just practice? Practice with me. Let's do it. Of course, a general rule of all advice: if the person doesn't want the advice, it is of no use. So this is true for almost anything you want to tell a person, that you kind of have to wait for them to be ready to listen to you. I was just doing an interview where there's a guy saying, look, it doesn't help to go and tell homeless people to stop drinking. And I'm like, yeah, well, it doesn't help to tell anybody to do anything that they don't feel like doing. Right? They have to first be ready to change and come to you before the advice can be helpful. But if a homeless person did come to me and say, I'm ready to change, then yeah, stop drinking. It's the first thing I would say, of course.
Mm-hmm. So we're just going to go on a short tour of your works over the next couple of questions.
All right.
The other book, Myth of the Rational Voter. Voters aren't that great. They don't really know a lot. They rely on other people to tell them what they should be thinking. What kind of questions should be on a competency test to earn the right to vote?
I mean, I would actually say that your story is much more optimistic than my story.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I mean, if people would just listen to other people when they voted, things would be a lot better. Because, as I explained in the book, for all the faults of elites generally have less crazy views than the masses. And therefore, if people would just defer to people in their social group who are better informed than they are, then a lot of problems would be avoided. The real problem is that people do not listen. There are, like I said, anti-market bias. This is something where elites seem to be, though subject to it, less subject than the rest of the population. And so if people would just go and listen to elites, how much we rely upon markets, they would say, all right, well, normal people want to do it and rely upon markets like 2.5 out of 10. Elites would tell them 4 out of 10, and we get 4 out of 10. Practice, we don't get that. So yeah, like the cover of the book does have sheep on it, but that's really optimistic because a sheep could just go like, bah, the economist said markets are great. Bah, I say it too. But in the real world, experts can say markets are great, and people just say, yeah, what do you know? What do you know about it? In terms of what should be on a competency test, I mean, the good news is that all kinds of knowledge do go together. There's positive correlations. So if you just want to avoid people going and complaining the test is biased, you could go and just put very objective questions like name as many Supreme Court justices as possible. And that actually, I think, there's good evidence, in fact, that will improve the quality of voting. ideally, I think it would have much deeper questions. Questions like, explain the best case you can for protectionism. All right. Right, that would be a really good question. And then if the person just says, to keep out the goddamn foreign products, like 0 out of 5. All right, that is not the intellectually best argument for protectionism. What are the better arguments? There's like, if we have all the plutonium in the world and our enemy is going to use it to nuke us, don't sell it to them. All right, that's a better one, for example. Right. Anyway, we could go into more details on that. So, better would be if there were questions that captured not just knowledge of narrow factual questions, but deeper things about understanding. Here's another really great one. Explain why pollution taxes are economically superior to pollution regulations. Or this is one. So you're going to be working on the Congressional Hill. There actually was a survey done of congressional staffers on this very question. All right, and they got answers from 50 of them. And if I remember correctly from Alan Blinder's book, 0 out of 50 were able to give the correct answer. Right, and the correct answer is, why are pollution taxes actually economically superior to regulations?
Like cap and trade?
Yeah, cap and trade works the same way as pollution as a tax. Mm-hmm. And of course, the answer is that a tax encourages the lowest cost, the firms that can reduce pollution at the lowest cost to do so, while allowing firms that can only do so at a higher cost to continue, thereby getting the maximum pollution cleanup for the minimum cost. And it also is great because it encourages innovation in pollution cleanup, because if someone figures out a cheaper way of doing it, it is profitable to adopt it as soon as possible. So those are the correct answers to that question. Again, if we could do a dream test and have questions like that, that would be really great. Again, that's so far beyond anything you could ever expect in the real world, but I'd be happy with a test that says how many senators every state have. We know only half the people get that one right. So things like that, sort of which party controls each branch of government now? All right. How about 2 years ago? All right.
Interesting. So another part of your research has been looking at family dynamics, looking at parents and children, and kids turn out a lot like their parents. Mm-hmm. I know your sons are spitting images of you. That's my impression, at least. Mm-hmm. Given all of that research, should we discount when people say, I had my formative experience in life that made me who I am when I was 17 years old, and I went on this one trip, and that changed my entire life? No, really, you just followed your preset genetic path.
I would say that you should definitely discount. Doesn't mean say that it's nothing, but the key thing to think about is something could be your formative experience, but if it hadn't been that one, something else would have been the same formative experience, so it doesn't mean as much as you think. For example, it could be that that person was my first love and changed the way that I think about love forever because it didn't work out. Well, what if you had dated that other person first? And that probably wouldn't have worked out, and then you probably would have drawn the same lesson from that. So it isn't really that it's that specific experience that was formative you think. There's the result that you get from introspection, which is informative in a way because you were not wrong about the way you felt at the time, but the idea that you can then see how you would have changed fundamentally, that's quite a bit harder. Again, it doesn't mean that you should put it at 0, but definitely always be open to the idea that you have a personality, and people of your personality are generally going to turn out a certain way. Right? That is a very good way of thinking about it. Here's a family story. I have a first cousin who stopped talking to any of us 30 years ago, and we could never figure out what we could possibly have done. And then my dad just heard what the answer is. Right? And the answer is that when she was 5, she overheard my parents saying something bad about her dad after her parents got divorced. And therefore, 15 years later, she purged them. All right, it's all right, maybe that's the real story. Isn't it more likely that you're just a neurotic person who wants to go and cut other people off for the most trivial and ridiculous reasons? And if you hadn't been that, it would have been one of another 100 things. My dad blew his nose wrong, and so now I can never talk to you again. That, again, I'm not going to bother to tell her this because I was purged 30 years ago. What did I do? I was just like the youngest cousin of the family. I got purged too because of what my parents said. So now in terms of cases where it's more plausible that it really is formative for you, there are times when there's a very rare occupation that you get sucked into where it just seems very unlikely that you would have bumped into that occupation otherwise. So that's one where, in a sense, you might say, well, I never would have been an entomologist if I hadn't had this one great entomology professor. And that, I think, is a lot more plausible. It's like you were destined to be an entomologist, and that's hard to believe. It's like, did you always love insects? So that one is more plausible that it really had a big formative effect. Or again, of course, if you meet the person that you marry, okay, that, you could say, really did have a huge effect on my whole life after that. But on the other hand, a lot of it also depends upon the metrics. So you might say, well, fine, this very particular life experience made you an entomologist, but you probably would have been a STEM person of some sort, and isn't STEM all pretty much the same thing anyway, right? And from a certain point of view, that's true, right? So STEM, whatever, math, engineering, science, whatever, it's all blah, blah, blah. All right, so if that's your perspective on it, I think I have this idea of being an unusual person, but Tyler Cowan, one of my best friends in the world, says, oh, that's all nonsense, Bryan. You're just a regular middle-class dude. That's all you are. Get rid of this absurd fantasy that you're something special or a unique person. And after a while, I said, all right, fine, here's one way in which I am different from other people, Tyler. How much money would you pay to spend an hour with me versus a randomly selected middle-class dude? And then he actually just said, I don't see why that's a relevant measure. Because I had him. He's introverted, so he does not want to actually talk to most people. Doesn't mean he doesn't want to talk to you, but he does not, if he's at a party, he would rather just hang out with the people he already knows, honestly. That is his instinct.
Interesting. So given all the formative experiences, do you have any other alternate life paths that you might have taken if you hadn't caught the econ bug at a fairly young age?
So actually, my earliest career ambition was to be an English professor.
Ooh.
I was a big fan of English literature, and I had ideas of somehow, like, I'll be a novelist and I'll support myself by day by being an English professor. I didn't realize how difficult it was to get that job even back then. So that was something I thought before. I also thought about being a philosophy professor. So that was one where I was into my third year of college before I decided between trying to be an econ professor and philosophy professor. If I hadn't been any kind of professor, probably I would have done computer science because I liked programming when I was in junior high and high school. So I'll tell you, I did basic programming. That's a language, if you've heard of it, on a Commodore VIC-20, which had a total of 4K of RAM. 4K of RAM, and how big was the hard drive? Trick question. It had no hard drive. All right, so there was no. In fact, there was no soft drive. There was a tape recorder that you could record things on, but those were so unreliable that basically, anytime you wanted to program, first thing would begin by retyping in the program. And then from there you add some more lines because it was just that. I guess I could have kept it on all the time. My parents wouldn't have let me because that would be wasting electricity. So those are the other career paths. Let's see. I got married very young, so that's something where I could see things having been different. I met my wife when I was 19, and we got married when I was 23, and I never dated anyone else, so that's unusual. Definitely really unusual for a PhD. So that obviously could have been different.
Interesting.
Let's see. In terms of other things, so I definitely could have, even after getting my PhD in economics, if Tyler had not very aggressively tried to push me to get me hired, then I might not have ended up as a professor because I was on the job market in year 4 of my PhD program. I had 9 interviews, 1 fly out from here, and 1 offer from here. If I hadn't gotten any offers, I would have tried 1 more year and then seen what I could get. But if I didn't get any academic offers then, I would have ended up in economic consulting or something else. And so that would have been pretty different, definitely.
But now you have the greatest job in the world.
Yeah, it is. For me anyway, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So another one of your personal specialty areas is immigration.
Mm-hmm.
You're a big immigration fan.
I am.
kind of the history of the United States is essentially a purely immigrant country. We are made up, at least historically, and heritage matters, as we've just concluded. We're made up of kind of the edge cases of Europe. Only the people who are most adventurous enough or most desperate enough to cross the ocean, come over here, settle the new territory. Is that why we're special and still growing versus them?
Not impossible. I don't know that we actually had that strong of a selection filter going on. So, like if you were to go and administer a personality test to would-be or potential immigrants in Europe from 1700 to 1920, like how high would they really have scored on risk-taking or adventuresomeness? It's not clear what was going, that would have scored that high. I think a lot of it actually was people moved to the U.S. because there were other people from their country already there. This is called diaspora dynamics. A lot of the reason why we got so many people from England is that there were already a lot of people from England. Right? A lot of the reason why we got a lot of Italians is that first there were a few Italians who came, and then that made it less scary. More Italians came, more came, and it snowballed. So that's, I think, a lot more of the story. In terms of the distinctive features of those people, whether they really were very extreme in terms of risk-taking or adventuresomeness, I can believe that they were like the 60th percentile or something like that. But even there, if you understand the genetics of personality, if your phenotype is at like the 60th percentile, your genotype could very easily only be like the 55th. And then, it just doesn't make sense to say that a huge difference is caused by that. So I don't think that it is as big as all that. Again, in a way, I would think that a more plausible story is precisely that the U.S. has more diversity, which means that it's harder for us to agree on anything, which means that it's harder to crush dissent and innovation. Right, so, in a more homogeneous country, it's easier to get everyone on the same page, and that page is generally likely to be, let's keep things the way they are. And if you keep things the way they are, things don't improve. They also don't get worse. But the reason that the modern world has developed is because people have been open to things getting better, at least.
You're somewhat skeptical of the arguments that we should kind of be screening for high IQ nations when thinking about immigration. Why? Because, as we did establish, heritage is important and all that. Why does the IQ filter? Why is that not consequential in your view?
So here is the most important thing to think about. Right. Most people who don't like IQ just are in denial and want to pretend like everyone's equally smart, and that's not true. All right. It's not nice, and I don't think you should go around to people who are not so smart and say, hey, guess what? You know why you're not as successful as I am? It's because you're not as smart as I am. I just thought it would be good for the world for you to be let in on this deep truth. Don't do that to people. It's a terrible way to treat other people. However, it is true that intelligence is one of the best predictors we have of job performance. Actually, probably is the best predictor of job performance. Definitely one of the best predictors that you can use to see how well a child will do in his career or his income or anything like that. So IQ is definitely predictive. There's also a lot of evidence that it is highly heritable, meaning that if there are two smart parents who have a baby and put the baby up for adoption, that baby has a much greater than normal chance of being smart also. So all that stuff is true, right? Now, a lot of people just want to go and deny that. But out of the people who like this stuff, they tend to leap to the most misanthropic interpretation of this, which is also not true. All right, and what do I mean? Well, it's one thing to say that a person is less successful because they're less smart, which often is correct. Doesn't mean that it would be better if they didn't exist. That's a very different question. All right. To go to, say, Google and say, well, Sergey Brin has done a lot more for the world than the janitor at Google because Sergey's so much smarter than the janitor. That's probably true. Does it follow that it would be good for the Google or the world if the janitor just dropped dead? No, it does not follow. That is a bizarre, psychopathic misinterpretation of the research. To say that because some people are smarter than others, it would be good if the less smart people were to be dead, or if they had never been born. All right, now, if you can buy that, and I think this is a pretty obvious point, then the next step is from the fact that one immigrant would be more productive than another, does it mean that we should not let in the less productive one? And you say, well, if we have a fixed budget of people we can let in, we can only let in 100 people. Wouldn't it be better to let in the geniuses? Yeah, it probably would be better to let in the geniuses. But who said it has to be 100 people? Why couldn't it be 50 million people where we can just let in everybody? That's a lot of where I'm coming from here. Now, if you push this further, you can say, well, wasn't Charles Manson a person who would have been better if he was never born? Like, yes, of course, it would have been better if Charles Manson was ever born. But where is the cutoff? How bad does a person have to be before it is a true statement to say would have been better if they'd never been born? And I say, even out of people who are quite low IQ, generally they are productive members of society. They're happy to be alive, so why is it that someone should look at them and say, wow, I don't even want you to be breathing the same air as me in the same country? I know there are other objections to this, but that's basically where I'm coming from is look, you can believe in the reality of IQ without falling into the psychopathic misinterpretation of thinking that it is good for people who are below average to not exist.
Mm-hmm. You had a debate with Peter Singer pretty recently.
Yeah.
And one of your conclusions was that he was maybe faking the whole effective altruism repentance thing.
Yeah.
Right? What can we learn about your own position on unlimited immigration from that realization? Maybe you're just thinking that if you advocate extreme enough, if you only compromise, you get 10% of what you want. That's what you truly, truly want.
Right. Yeah, so am I just exaggerating things in order for effect? Well, I mean, here is why I am convinced that Peter Singer is not saying really what he thinks. He wrote an article saying it is perfectly fine to not say what you really think on the very issues we're talking about. So that's pretty much a smoking gun, right? Other than saying, hello, everyone, I'm now saying something I don't really think. Here it is, right? He did everything short of that. You have a whole article saying it is perfectly morally fine to go and lie for a good cause, namely X, and then X was what we were talking about. I, on the other hand, have a long history of saying you should tell the truth even if it is not of good consequences. So I have been pushing this for a long time. I'm not so crazy to say don't tell a lie to save the world. If it ever comes up, just lie. Right? If you're ever, it's like, tell a lie to save the world, please just lie and save us. But I am of the view that there is a default duty to tell the truth even if the consequences are bad. And so that's where I think that by having done this for a very long time, that at least puts the scales on I probably actually am telling you the truth. Of course, like another thing you just do is talk to people who know me well and say, do you think that he really believes this stuff? I actually have had people go and talk to people, like on the education book, there's someone who came to a close friend and says, does he really believe the signaling stuff? And he's like, oh, yeah, he does. There's a point where someone says, you really believe it? And it's like, look, I would like to thank the Academy for this Oscar that I just got for Best Actor because I would deserve one if I had gone all this time pretending to have this view. I'm trying to remember the actual story. Blogger Noah Smith, at least for a while, was convinced that I was actually really opposed to immigration, and I was just trying to discredit the cause of immigration by making overstated arguments. I don't know if he still believes that, so I don't know, Noah, but you got me wrong, Noah. I hung out with Noah for like 6 hours doing a role-playing game, so I don't know what kind of a read he got on me there, but what you see is what you get. Unless there's something really bad going on. I do actually have a tweet that I put up a few years ago saying if I ever apologize for politely saying something true, know it was done under extraordinary duress. Just so to invalidate any apologies I'm ever going to give in the future. I just wanted to get that out there. So it hasn't come up yet. Hopefully it never will. I actually do have a bet with a guy where the guy has bet me that I will, in my own judgment, be treated very unfairly by George Mason sometime in the next 10 years. So, and he trusts me enough to decide my own case whether this has happened. But so far, so good.
Well, here's to hoping, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, talking about uncomfortable truths, and we can pass on this too.
No, let's hear it.
there's been some talk from a certain very controversial person in the past month or so pointing out that Jewish people are overly represented in the media industry. But you've studied research, like you've seen the research. We go over it in class that the median Jewish IQ is one standard deviation above regular person median. Is there a point to pointing out, like, hey, there's a lot of very people put in influential positions and they are of Jewish ancestry? Or does that genuinely lead to persecution? And should we not point that out? Or how should we go about that?
I mean, I would say that this is one of the many things where it really matters a lot more how you say it than what you say. Right? If you say it as, Jews are running the media, then, all right, then I think it is fair to stigmatize such person. On the other hand, when you said it in a perfectly fine way, and I don't see any reason why anyone should be getting upset. The slippery slope of as soon as we allow a single person to make any statement on this, no matter how true, we're on the road to Nazism, seems crazy to me. And if you're really going to do that, we could barely talk about anything at all. So I think that's pretty silly. I'm happy to go and talk about this in a lot more detail. Like in my labor economics class, I point out that while it is true that Jews, particularly Jews of Eastern European origin, score about one standard deviation above average on IQ, their earnings are way higher than you expect given their IQ. Jewish earnings are way higher than you expect given their IQ, education, age, and a bunch of other stuff. So it's like, what's going on there? I mean, on the one hand, there is the conspiratorial version of, now we see it's not their IQ, there's something, right? There's that. On the other hand, there's like, maybe they have some additional cultural traits not well captured by any of our measures that explain their high level of success. If you delve more deeply into those results, it's even more interesting, because guess what? Jewish women are right on the regression line. Jewish men are way above the regression line, so it is not even a general Jewish effect, it is a Jewish male effect. We think Jewish males earning about 60% over what you would expect given every other advantage they've already got. So what's going on? There's so little research on it. I don't know. I was recently doing another interview where I was saying we've got two groups, Jews and Asians, that have done especially well in academics. What can other groups learn from them? That seems to me a very reasonable question to ask. So like anytime there's a group that's especially successful, it makes sense to say, what's their secret sauce? What are they doing right? I think if we were to go and study it with that attitude, then I think you'd have to be pretty crazy to be upset about it. Not that this would stop a bunch of people from being crazy, because there's so many very touchy people in the world. And we can't, if we listen to them all, we couldn't even breathe, so don't.
All right. So we're going to do some rapid fires and then a wrap up, and then do we have time for Q&A?
Awesome.
All right, we have time for a Q&A. First rapid fire. Should we be using more stimulants or less?
Right, so like caffeine,
Adderall,
and so
amphetamines, the whole shebang.
Yeah. I will start out by saying I have no firsthand experience with any other caffeine. I don't like coffee, so I don't drink coffee. I drink Coca-Cola. From my firsthand experience, I can't tell that I get any stimulative effect from this stuff at all. So I don't know I don't feel like I have any good firsthand read on what's really going on with this stuff. Main thing I will say is that the people that I've known, multiple people seem to have problems with this stuff, and I don't know anyone where it seemed like where they stopped doing it and then they became failures. So I tend to think that it's probably a bad idea. It's not one where I would push it aggressively, just like advice in general. I don't push advice aggressively. If someone were to come to me and say, look, should I start using this stuff? I would say, I would think not. Like, what would make you think you should start? And if they said, like, I really just can't get anything done at all, and like I have some friends, then I might try it at a very low dose, see what happens. But I don't have any really strong opinion on it. I guess with what's his name at FTX, people are it's like, okay, one guy in one extreme case, like what does that prove? In the media proves everything, but it's not reasonable for one dramatic story to change your mind about much of anything.
Mm-hmm. What's the deal with karaoke?
The deal with karaoke.
You're a big karaoke guy.
I do like it. Let's see. I mean, for me, the kind of karaoke that I'd really like to do is sing-along karaoke where you get everyone to sing together. So one person leads and then everyone else joins. I think that this is a nice way of getting people to do a common activity, which is a lot of what human happiness is about. One thing that's very striking if you look at personality research is that, or just if you observe human beings, people normally are really only smiling when they are interacting with other people. If a person is totally alone, it is very unusual for them to have much positive affect of any kind, right? You could also just look at animals. The asocial animals don't seem to have much positive emotion, like cats. But the social animals, like dogs, have a lot of positive emotionality. In personality research, you can see that cheerfulness correlates highly with extroversion, so interacting with other people. Karaoke is something where, the kind that I really like, it's where you get together with a group of people and you don't just sit there, you actually engage in a common activity, which I think is especially good for getting people to be happy and just to enjoy and bond. Dan Klein years ago did an experiment where, I won't tell you the point of the experiment, but part of the experiment was everyone had to sing a song together. And he was talking about how the motive of it was to make people feel like a team, and it seemed to really work. It seems ridiculous, and people are embarrassed, but doing something embarrassing together is actually a way for people to bond. Something else I really like about karaoke is it's a chance for people to go and share songs that mean something to them. And I have learned so much new music through karaoke because a lot of times, you just hear something on the radio, it doesn't strike you. But when you see a fan who cares about it enough to sing it, this is what actually, for me, is oh, wow, that's why Weezer is great. I became a Weezer fanatic, and my whole family makes fun of me. You're listening to Weezer all the time, and whenever you stop listening to one Weezer song, you just find another one, and you listen to that all the time. It's this is great stuff, of course. But I owe that to the Tabarrok brothers, who did Say It Ain't So at a karaoke night that I have, and there's a lot of other songs that I've learned that way. So whereas just listening to the radio or something, I don't think I would get that exposure, or I wouldn't get that vision of the new music. So it's a great way for me, at least, of expanding my music appreciation. I don't ever want to be one of these people who's too old to learn new music and love it.
Nice. Has anyone ever asked you to be a part of a conspiracy? Are you conspiracy adjacent?
Yes, and I can't give it away.
But it does happen then.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are active conspiracies out there.
Of course. Things have to be done, and fortune favors the bold.
Nice. Yeah. That reassures me.
Yeah. Right. It's easy just because most people don't care who you are or what you're doing anyway, so. Right.
Nice. Who's your favorite comedian?
Ooh, favorite comedian.
You've done some comedy.
Yeah. I did stand-up comedy in New York once. I try to be funny.
He said to a room of laughs.
Yeah. You owe it to other people to make it to try to be funny, right? And they owe it to you. Right? It's like good manners. Let's see. Very favorite comedian. If you just sort of add up all of the enjoyment that I've gotten, it would have to be Seinfeld, because I've seen every Seinfeld episode, and when I rewatch Seinfeld, I'm still laughing a lot. In terms of people where I'd be most excited about a new comedy special, it would be John Mulaney. So John Mulaney, I've only had 5 hours of his comedy in my life. He just has he has 3 specials, plus he has the Sack Lunch Bunch, which is controversial, but I'm pro Sack Lunch Bunch as well. I'd even karaoke some of the songs, but anyway. So if that would probably be what I would be quickest to watch if I knew that it was out there. Was the new John Mulaney special? I watched all the Bill Burr specials twice, so that stuff I really like a lot. Let's see, Jim Gaffigan's more mainstream, but I've seen him live and I like all of his stuff. Let's see, who else is really good? Nikki Glaser. She's really good. Yeah, I mean, I was watching her and I'm like, oh my God, I can't. There's a lot of people I couldn't watch this with, but she's hilarious. Let's see, and yeah, so and there's a lot of others that stand up is a lot of the stuff that I watch actually.
All right. Yep. So we're heading into the Christmas season right now. Mm-hmm. How do you gift give? Are you like an economic utilitarian? I'm going to give you $50. Do whatever the hell you want with it, or is it? you want to give the personal touch. What's your think process?
So the main thing that we've been doing in my family for a long time is the rule that only kids get gifts, on the theory that adults have the money to get what they want, and it's just a pain in the neck to go and get them stuff. So that's normally what I do, is just give stuff to kids. When the kids are really little, where they just wouldn't have any idea how to spend money, then you get them stuff. Once they're older, then I do switch more and more into giving kids cash, and it seems like kids like that stuff like that anyway. Let's see. In terms of things that I would actually give as a gift, they're basically activities that you do with your friends together. So I will take you out to a meal. That's something that we do together. And that's something where if I didn't give it to you, then it wouldn't happen. So it's not something where you could just go and spend your own money and get it for yourself. Let's see. Like vacations, things like that are the main things I would think of as it's ones where it's participatory, like karaoke. So it's not one where you could just give the money. You have to actually do it with the person.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right. So wrap-up question. Where should students go from here? How do members of Econ Society, like Mason students in general, how do we involve ourselves in Mason Econ? What should we be doing?
Let's see. I mean, first thing I said is always be thinking about what am I trying to do with my life? What jobs am I interested in? Doesn't mean you have to know exactly, but just to have the general feel for what kinds of jobs you would like to do. The good news is if you are an econ major, this is the highest paid of all the easy majors. This is something I always tell my students, and you come to the right place. This is where people who don't really know what they want to do, but know they don't want to do STEM, come and they generally land on their feet with a high-paid job of some kind. Right, so that is the good news. In terms of how to get the most out of your college experience, the main thing I would say is that there are a whole lot of fascinating, brilliant people on campus, some in econ, some in other places, who basically have empty office hours every week because they don't teach any student who gives a damn about anything they're saying. Right? And where do you fit in? Well, I often advise people, and I'll advise you guys, for any subject that you have any interest in at all, just go to the web page for the faculty and go down the list and say, there's a 5% chance that you might gain something from talking to that person. Go and put a little check mark next to their name and find out when they're available and go and talk to them about their subject. You get a lot more out of it if you read a little bit about the person's work first. So don't just show up and say, hey, I hear you're an economist. Tell me some economics. All right, that doesn't go over as well. But if on the other hand you say, hey, I read your book about the fall of the Soviet Union, that's really interesting, then at first the professor is assuming, well, you're one of my students and you're here to grub for grades, right? It's like, no, I'm just curious about the history of communism. I saw you read a book on it. There'll be a brief moment of stunned silence. It's like, oh. All right. And then there's a good chance that you'll have a great conversation with that person, which could lead to all kinds of other good things, maybe just a nice friendship. Maybe you'll wind up getting to have research opportunities. Maybe they will go and tell you some other good things to read. There's all kinds of great stuff that can come from this. And again, just give them 5 minutes of your time to everybody there's a 5% chance that you might get something out of it. And it's totally doable because almost no one else is following this advice. If everyone followed my advice, then there'd be a line a mile long for every professor's office, and then you couldn't follow my advice. But it is not true that many people will follow my advice, so it's basically just a lot of potentially valuable interaction on the sidewalk. Obviously start with your own department, but try other departments too. Just try meeting faculty. Graduate students also, a lot of graduate students have interesting things to say, and they know a lot about their subject. It varies more. Don't be discouraged if a professor just brushes you off and say, well, if you're not in my class, get the hell out of here. There are a few monsters like that, but they're actually really rare. Most professors are discouraged just because students aren't interested, not because they don't like students. People often talk about like these professors and how they're lazy and they're apathetic and they don't really care. And I say, well, there's some of that, but a lot of the problem is just with the students, or the professors basically adjust the material to the level that the students will respond to. Right? So you can see like Steven Pinker at Harvard, who gets prizes for best professor on campus. He says he still has like 50% attendance in his classes. So it's like Steven Pinker's not good enough of a professor for these students. And it's like, well, based upon their behavior, yes. This means that probably there's no professor in the universe that's good enough for them. They just don't care about this stuff. So you can see how Pinker might get depressed about that. But I always tell people, don't get depressed about the half of the students that don't show up. Be happy for the half that do. Right? And if it's a class where most of the students are asleep, well, are any of the students awake? Be happy that anyone's awake and talk to them.
It's good advice. That's how you and I kind of met originally.
Well, it's not like the class that you're in. Students are good, but
very nice, Professor Caplan. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So Jacob has the mic. Walk up. He'll hand the mic to you. This is Q&A time. So if you have questions, if not, I can keep going. I can do this all night.
So can I. And you did a great job, Carlos.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Do you want to stay here till like midnight? We can be talking. They'll kick us out of the building.
Yeah. We'll see.
We have donuts.
We'll see who drops first.
Beautiful.
Hey, Professor Caplan. Thanks for coming today. So you talked about an IQ, that a lot of the arguments against IQ are pretty bad. Now, one argument I've heard against IQ that I thought was very interesting was, and it's someone you talked with, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, his argument that unintelligence is correlated with unsuccess. However, that doesn't necessarily imply that once you get past like average IQ, that there is much intelligence. Do you think there's an asymmetry there? Do you think that attack on IQ is reasonable, or?
Yeah. No, I think Taleb is totally wrong, and he's ignoring a pile of data. This is not true. Now, the way that you could transform what he's saying into something that's correct is that most people with really high IQs don't accomplish anything incredible. So they may make 4 times the normal amount of money, but they don't create anything, they don't have any legacy. That's true, right? And what's going on? Well, most people are not creative at all. It's hard to accept if you are creative, but most people will live their entire lives and they will not come up with really anything new. I mean, it's like if you are someone with a lot of imagination, it's kind of hard to believe, but it's just the harsh reality. My dad is super smart, but he is not creative. And if you tried to make him, he would just say, like, what is the point of all of this nonsense? Harumph. All right. So, here's the main thing: is that there's only a few thousand, 1 in a million people on Earth, and there are way more people with IQs of over 150. So, of course, most of them are not going to set the world on fire. But if you were to go and try to predict how well someone is going to do in life, knowing they have 150 IQ, they're probably going to be earning double the amount of money that someone with a 130 is earning, which you might say, well, it's just double a regular amount, double that money, who cares? It matters a lot to a lot of people. So that's really where I would go. And then also another way of thinking about this, there's a famous Harvard psychologist named Howard Gardner who's famous for his work on multiple intelligences. He was once asked, what is the minimum intelligence of the conventional kind you need to be a genius in any of your multiple intelligences? And he said, you got to have at least 130. You have to be in the top 5%. So it's like, all right, that's still pretty restrictive. That's definitely not saying as soon as you're average, then you're fine.
Thank you.
So I have a quick question before I get to my real question. And that's as far as Weezer goes, are you just a green and blue album, or are you all in?
Yeah, I'm all in. Yeah, Beverly Hills, and there's really no Weezer I've heard that I don't like. There's stuff that I haven't got. I haven't really hit the full level of I want to listen to this all the time. But it's not just the blue album. It's a very wide range.
So now my real question is, could you tell me a little bit more about your book, More Selfish Reasons to Have More Children?
Yeah.
I actually, one of my classes today, we were talking about, population growth and, how children actually become more and more expensive, all of that stuff, diminishing marginal returns on the happiness that you derive from children and all of that stuff. So I'm interested to see the benefits of it. Yeah.
Right. So again, the title of the book is Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids. So the starting point of the book is behavioral genetics. It's this field that tries to understand why do people turn out the way that they do. People have argued about nature versus nurture for thousands of years, making no progress, saying, well, in my opinion, it's nature. Well, in my opinion, it's nurture. Well, that's very helpful. But around 1960, there were some researchers who said, we can do better than that. Why don't we go and, first of all, accept the reason why we haven't made much progress is that people keep studying ordinary families where you combine a family environment with half your genes. But we can make progress if we go and study atypical families, such as kids that are adopted, or we can go and compare kids that are adopted and see how similar they are to their adopting family compared to biological children. We could also go and see how similar are identical twins versus fraternal twins to find out if you turn up the genetic dial of similarity 50 to 100, how much more similarity you get. Punchline of this research is that, especially in the long run, nature has been much underrated, nurture has been overrated. Now, what does this have to do with number of kids to have? Well, this. The standard, especially elite parenting style in the Western world is what we call helicopter parenting. It's all based on the theory that you must do massive parental investment into a child or they will be a loser. And I say this is just a story that contradicts the evidence that we have. It is not true. There is a wide range of parenting styles that will all yield approximately the same long-run outcomes. And the first implication of this is if you don't like doing the helicopter parenting, don't. But the second implication, and what gives the book its title, is to rethink the number of kids that you want. If it isn't really true that you have to engage in a lot of unpleasant parental investment, then the number of kids that are optimal for you will be different than if it was true. Around the time the book came out, there was an op-ed on the theme of soccer as contraception. The idea of the piece was, a mom said, we got 2 kids, they're in soccer, their soccer games take up all of our time, we're thinking of having a 3rd kid, but then we said, wait, if we have a 3rd kid, we have to do 3 sets of soccer practices. That will kill us, right? And so we don't want to have a 3rd kid. And basically my book reverses that reasoning and says, since it is not true that you need to go and have your kids do a bunch of unpleasant activities you don't really want to do, then in order for them to have a decent future, then that 3rd kid actually could very well be a good deal. The book does not try to convince people that had no interest in kids in the first place. I've gotten actual angry phone calls from someone saying, well, I happen to be very happy with my childless life. And I mean, first of all, you don't sound very happy with your childless life. But second of all, that's cool. As I said in the book, I'm not here to harass anyone. I'm here to point out opportunities of which you were likely unaware. To my mind, to get angry at my book is like I'm passing out coupons for chocolate 25% off, and a person says, I don't even like chocolate. I have a chocolate allergy. Did you know about that? Like, just say no, or just take the coupon and throw it away like a normal person. So that's where most of the book is coming from, is saying that parents have needlessly made parenting into this unpleasant chore. The science says that there is really very little payoff for this. And once you accept that, it doesn't make sense to just change your parenting, but to change the number of kids that you want to have. That's the argument.
Thank you.
Sure. Cool.
So I have a much less serious question.
Cool.
So you mentioned you like playing role-playing games.
Yeah.
Which ones do you like? Do you like Dungeons & Dragons, RuneQuest,
Right.
like that?
So when I was in high school, I played Dungeons & Dragons for like 8 hours every Saturday night, including prom night.
Nice.
All right. So at this point, I feel burnt out on Dungeons & Dragons. I only ever played first edition, by the way. So I never played the other editions. But let's see. What really got me started again is once I felt like I had tenure in the bag, then I wanted to get some other hobbies to return to. A game that I got really excited about is Mutants and Masterminds, which is a superhero role-playing game, and also the Hero System. These are both, so the Hero System, if you have not heard of it, it is a generic role-playing game designed where you can model any possible story, and I really like that idea. The system itself is so hard to learn that it's, like I have a friend who said it's kind of like becoming like a medieval umbrella manufacturer where you have to learn, you have to apprentice for 10 years. The core rule book is literally bulletproof. People have shot bullets through the book, and the book will stop bullets. It's so thick. Mutants and Masterminds is an easier system. And I did have the idea, though, that since the hero system was originally based upon Champions, a superhero system, if you can model superheroes, you can model anything. So I have sort of adapted the Mutants and Masterminds rules, turned it into a universal system. So like right now, for my son's birthday, I'm writing a Japanese baseball manga role-playing game. All right, so this is a big genre in Japanese comic books. It's like a baseball comic book. And I've never done a sports story before, so this is pretty cool. So I'm doing that. I've done lots of different genres. I've done a lot of horror stories. I've done historical games. I've done a big superhero saga, of course. Let's see. I have one where you play people on an Indian counterterrorism team. So you're all working for the government of India, right? And again, this is actually a genre in Bollywood. It's like the Bollywood counterterrorism movie, right? So I watched a couple of them and said, all right, so that's kind of interesting. And what would that be like? So that one I had a lot of fun with because part of the conceit is that 2 members of the counterterrorism team are actually famous actors playing themselves, but they're undercover. So I like that idea. Let's see. So yeah, but for me, a lot of what I like to do is just to tell a story that you can interact with that's just different from any story that I've ever done. And I don't like to do genre fiction. I don't want to do something that's like a standard cowboy story. I want it to be a different twist on the cowboy story. For me, a lot of this is sort of my frustrated English professor persona, where I want to come up with a new story that just says something different and crosses genre, blends genres. So, if you like playing, maybe we can play sometime. By the way, so every summer I have a big 2-day gaming festival at my house, and I invite everyone I know, and now I know you guys, so you guys are all invited. If you want to make sure you get invited, there's a Facebook group for Caplan, and if you sign up for that right now before you forget, then you'll get an invitation whenever it happens this summer. You don't even have to play games. Some people just come to hang out and eat some free food, but whatever you want to do.
Okay, thanks again for being here, Professor. Sure. Earlier we spoke about the problem with communism, and everyone from Hayek and to more recent economists have really identified the problem with communism as this asymmetry in information, right? Like you have the top people who could never have all the information of the masses, right? And so you get all these distortions. Bringing that forward, bringing that sort of problem of information to how policymakers or even economists deal with the world and the kind of policy recommendations they make. On the opposite side of that spectrum is the economist, what was his name? He wrote The Tyranny of Experts. Easterly. William Easterly was at the World Bank and really saw from the inside of that sort of top-down administration that you get very bad results and a lot of waste that way. Coming back to what you said earlier, I'm trying to ask a very pointed question. You feel that economists can, through various matrices and sort of regressions and so on, can really get some answers about how the world should work, right? Don't you think that if you are opposed to communism, that you should also be opposed to the centralization and authority of economists?
Right. So let's just back up.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I totally get the question.
Okay.
Yeah. So what was really so terrible about communism anyway? All right. So there are people like Hayek who want to say it was a problem of information. I've read a lot of history of communism. I don't think Hayek really did. And I think he's just, he is greatly overrating the importance of information. The real problem with communism comes down to terrible incentives. Like you say, we are going to create a farming system where we murder you if you try fleeing the farm. And let's see, is this? Okay. No. So. So we are going to murder you if you try fleeing the farm, and we're not going to give you any extra money if you do a better job. And so they have problems with food production. And I think the main problems with communism came down to terrible incentives, not lack of information. Basically, they gave very weak incentives for producing useful goods for human consumption, very poor incentives for food, for regular production. At the same time, communist regimes are great at giving strong incentives for the stuff they care about, like the secret police, the military, border guards, space exploration, the Olympics. Communist regimes are great at all of these things because those are the things they actually cared about, and so those are the things where they gave good incentives and they got good results. There were experiments on agricultural productivity under communism where they found out, hey, if we just pay farmers for productivity, we can get them to grow a lot more food. And then guess what happened? The people that started the experiments got sent to Siberia. All right, now you say, well, is that a problem with information? Well, it's the kind of problem with information where it's just like, comrade, you would better not say such things or else you will end up in Siberia. It's that kind of an information problem, which is not really an information problem. Again, it's an incentive problem where the people at the top don't want to look stupid, don't want to admit that they're fanatical, silly dogmas or fanatical, silly dogmas. And so they build an entire system based upon ridiculous lies that really just common sense can see through. So I don't see the main problem of communism being that it's so complicated to figure out what the right thing to do is. I think it's much more about the right thing's pretty obvious, and then if you give people terrible incentives, they don't do the right thing. Does not mean that information is not an additional problem that communism had, but I think it's much more about the bad incentives. And again, I think that once you appreciate that, then you can say a lot of the advice that economists have about how to make the world better is just to go and make incentives better, which we know a lot about.
Incentives also require information.
To some degree, yes. Everything requires some kind of information, but is it really that hard? Things like, how about we pay people some money to donate kidneys instead of saying it's illegal to sell a kidney for any positive price, but you can give it away for free? I think a free market would be better, but a system where you just gave $5,000 to people to donate a kidney would be a lot better than the one that we've got, and pretty obviously so. In terms of other problems with information, it's true markets are very good at coordinating subtler kinds of information. But again, the main problem that communist regimes had wasn't subtle. It was messing up basic things. Right? And and on the other hand, like I said, they were really good at, for example, figuring out how to keep people from fleeing the country. No one knows more about keeping people from fleeing countries than communist regimes. The East German government, they were highly innovative. If you go to the Museum of the Berlin Wall, they say, well, the first wall was really just a barbed wire with some guys with guns. But within a year, they had improved it a lot. And with 10 years, it was the most amazing technology, the automatic firing machine guns and everything else. So when they cared, they got the job done. It's just that it was a system based upon tyranny and ridiculous dogmas rather than trying to go and give people a decent life. So that a lot of stuff. Again, if an economist came along and said, well, I'm going to use economists to plan the whole economy, I say, yeah, that's probably a bad idea. But if an economist came along and said, I've got a lot of good ideas for how to make things better, I wouldn't say, who are you to say such things? I'd say, all right, well, hit me with it. Let's hear it.
3 more.
Okay, hi, I'm Charles.
Hey, Charles.
You talk a lot about IQ, and I do agree with you that's a very large predictor. But there are a lot of people on the left, like Andrew Yang, and people on the right, like Jordan Peterson, who believe that this will be a very large problem of we need more people. We do still need people in the workforce. The type of jobs that we have are getting more and more complicated, and we need to find some way to educate people, or else we may have some large deficit in people who can actually work in the new demands of this new economy. So my question is, what is it a problem, and B, what should we do about it?
Yeah. So here's the good news. They're wrong. Right? we have a lot of evidence on what's been going on in the American labor market. And basically there's a period up to around 1990 where it looked like demand for the lowest skilled workers was going down. Since then it stabilized and has gone up. The group that actually seems like they've done the worst in the last 30 years are the middle skilled workers. So they're just confused about the basic facts. It is not true that jobs for low-skilled workers have disappeared, far from it. COVID gave an extra big boost to all kinds of low-skilled jobs. Are you willing to be around humans? Yes. We got a job for you. But that was really the story of the economy during COVID, is if you just show up and be near another person, there's plenty of work to do. So that's the first thing to realize, is that it's just not true that this has happened so far. Now, in terms of whether it's going to happen, that's a prediction about the future. I would say that we should not trust the predictions of people who just don't even understand what happened for the last 30 years. Step one for being an accurate predictor is to know what exists now and what's happened for the last 30 years. In terms of what we can do about preparing our workforce for the more complicated world of the future, I suggest we continue with what we're currently doing, which is people learn by doing on the job. And again, this is in a way my critique of the education system in a simple slogan. People imagine that education is job training. In reality, though, education is a passport to the real training, which happens on the job. Even in things that seem very vocational, like programming, when you really talk to programmers, how much programming do you really learn in class? Usually say, yeah, not that much. Mostly it's self-taught, and then I got in a job, and then I had to learn some more stuff, which I mostly taught myself. Some other people, my coworkers helped me out. That's how I know how to do my job. I mean, if you look at low-skilled jobs now, they don't teach you how to do this stuff in school. Like, what school teaches you how to work at McDonald's? Which is not an easy job, by the way, right? I mean, like, if you just try putting me in McDonald's, you think I would be saying, oh, this is so easy, like anyone. No, I would be like one of the most stressful days of my life to work at McDonald's. I have no doubt about that. And I would feel intellectually challenged to deal with it, because it's like, wait, that guy, his order's messed up, I have to help him, I have to talk to him, but this other person's talking to me, I also have to worry about the fries. Like, it is not an easy job, and yet people who are well below average IQ learn how to do it by doing it. So that's how the whole economy is really held together right now. It's with learning by doing. So yeah, like turning to schools and saying they're going to save low-skilled workers from technological obsolescence. It's like, good thing we're not going to have technological obsolescence, because the schools aren't going to be the remedy for this problem at all. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor, for being here and spending time with us. My question is about the communism and like what we discussed before. It makes people insensitive and also slow down the whole economies. Mm-hmm. And for where I come from, China is known for like being an economist country. Mm-hmm. And during the lockdown period, the COVID period, I feel like it's kind of going backwards. Mm-hmm. So I was like wondering, what's your opinion on this?
Wondering what? Your opinion.
What's your opinions on this?
Right.
Well, China goes backwards or something like that.
Right. Well, so for 30 years under Mao Zedong, China was the most horrifying example of communism in human history. And you probably know many tens of millions of people starved to death because of Mao's fanatical nonsense, where he took regular Marxist-Leninist nonsense and then he added on a bunch of new nonsense. Again, like weird stuff like, during the war, we learned that the greater the challenge, the greater the effort of the soldier, and therefore it would follow that if you plant the wheat seeds 6 feet down on the ground, they will struggle harder and will be hardier when they emerge. And like, does this make sense to you? Like, oh yes, great one. All right, well, let's try it. And then, like, did it work out? Oh, your idea worked great. Fine, make the whole country do it. And you have like horrible famines from this kind of ridiculous stuff, which even the Soviet Union didn't do stuff this stupid. So it was based upon this communist leader who effectively was a new emperor, right? But a much more tyrannical emperor and much more caught up in his own bizarre theories about the world than almost any historic emperor of China. Then he got replaced by Deng Xiaoping, who was, of course, also in the Communist Party, but was much more pragmatic and kept his eyes open and realized that if China would move away from communism, they could go and greatly improve the situation in the country. And he was able to pull that off. So really, there were decades of really good economic growth in China. Did not mean that they abandoned communism, of course, but what they did is they basically got rid of it in the agricultural sector, which is the most important one for a really poor country to do. They had problems with just basic provision of food for many decades, and not just problems, they had horrible famines. So Deng's able to go and basically reprivatize agriculture, which then allows there to be a massive increase in agricultural productivity, and that then is the basis for expanding other parts of the economy, because if people don't have food, what do they have? But once people have plenty of food, then you frees up workers to do other things. So there was a period where things improved a lot. Still, of course, the basic structure of communism was still there, and there's still a lot of state industries, but there was room for other things to expand. And yeah, it does seem like with Xi, or is that the right way to say his name? Xi? How do you say it? Yes, that. Yes. We see. So basically, it looks like he is turning back the clock on a lot of areas where China has improved. I mean, the really obvious one is after Mao, every Chinese leader made a point of "I don't rule for life." Right, which you might say that's a pretty small concession. It's a big step forward from "I rule for life." Right, so Deng Xiaoping, he stepped down voluntarily, right, and this pattern was, in my mind, like a big step forward. And now it looks like Xi is going to try to rule for life. So that is one symptom of something very bad going on. And then restoring like the more oppressive policies. Obviously, the COVID policy itself. This is something that it's the kind of thing that would have happened under Mao. Of course, Mao himself, he didn't do any, he did other crazy things, but basically saying, we're just going to go and get rid of normal human socializing and human social interaction for a few years for what is, even after we got a vaccine. I thought it was crazy before we had a vaccine, but after we have a vaccine to say we're just going to live in this dehumanized, isolated way forever seems just crazy, terrible to me. In terms of what can really be done, yeah. The problem with systems like this is you really have to wait for the dictator to die to get change. There's a few ways they can die. There's, they die of old age. They die under mysterious circumstances, and then there's their friends get rid of them. So all of those are possible, of course. I don't think that things are going to improve much for China until he dies, one way or another. Is he 70 yet? Is he even 70?
I don't think so.
No, he's 71. All right, but he's Chinese, so he's probably going to live for another 15 years. So, yeah, that's the problem. At least it's not North Korea. That kid could be ruling the country for another 50 years. Right? He was a kid when he started. Is he still a kid? I don't know, but yeah, like that. My honest prediction for North Korea, like there will be no really positive change until he dies. When he dies, it might get worse. Right? There could be a new worse dictator comes along. There could be a civil war. There could be all kinds of other terrible things. But things could not really improve much until he dies.
Last question.
All right. Hi, Professor Caplan. I'm Julian, and someone else mentioned Andrew Yang, and that got me thinking something in the back of my mind for a long time. As you probably know, Yang says that automation is probably going to take over low-skilled jobs in the next 30, 50 years, and then the solution to that is $1,000 checks to everybody, UBI. So simple question, do you believe in that automation is going to take over, and do you believe that UBI is a solution?
Yeah. We have several hundred years of history with automation, and every single time there have been people saying this is going to destroy employment for most of the human race, and they've been wrong every single time. Instead, what happens is when we automate new jobs, people say, what else could we do with the people instead? And guess what? There's always something else to do. Is it possible it will be different this time? Of course. It's possible that the sun won't rise tomorrow. But what is a reasonable way of forecasting the future? It's by saying that the future is going to be like the last 200 years, and that people who make, and especially that we should not believe the predictions of people who don't even understand what's been going on for the last 30 years. So, normally people who believe in the UBI think that low-skilled jobs are being destroyed already, and it's just totally false. In terms of the UBI is one of the worst ideas that I have ever heard to come out of smart people's mouths. All right, why? Well, let me put it this way. The world just hit 8 billion people. If you were very rich and you had $8 billion to give to charity, would it be a reasonable idea to give $1 to each person on Earth? Would that be a good use of your philanthropy, to give $1 to every person? I'd say that would be one of the most boneheaded things you could possibly do with the money. It's like, can you think of any better thing to do with the 8 billion than to give $1 to every person on Earth? Like, are there no war orphans? Are there no place where people are hungry? Are there no uncured diseases that could use research funding? There are so many better things that you could do with that money than give $1 to every person on earth. It is a ridiculous waste of money to do it that way. That is not smart philanthropy. Smart philanthropy is about figuring out where the money will do the most good and then spend it there. What is the UBI? The UBI is like saying we're just going to go and take a pile of money and give everyone an equal amount. It is extraordinarily wasteful. Most of the people that are getting the money totally don't need it. And so you're wasting piles of taxpayer money on people who do not need it. And you might say, well, what's the big deal? The big deal is to pay for that, you need extremely high taxes. If you go and do the math for the UBI, here's what you'll find. All right, so let's just go through the room. What seems like a reasonable amount of money to give to one individual who makes no money under a UBI? This is we get rid of all the other programs, all other redistribution, get rid of everything else. How much money should you get from the government if you have no money, if you have no income at all? $2,000. Sorry, $2,000 per month. All right. All right, and now, suppose you earn $1 worth of money. How much should the government reduce your check by?
Some percentage.
Yeah. So some number between, basically, you got to give me some number between reduce your check by a full $1 and reduce it by a penny. What seems like a reasonable amount to reduce your check by?
10 cents.
10 cents. All right, great. All right. So we got $2,000 a month per person. So that's $24,000 for an individual. That's $96,000 for a family of 4. And if we go and apply that 10% benefit reduction rate, that family will pay no tax until the family income is $960,000.
Oh, so it's like one over.
Yeah, yes, it's the total. It's the amount divided by the benefit reduction rate. All right, and this is ignoring all other government programs. So this would basically be the most progressive tax system that the world has ever known. It would basically try to shove the entire tax burden onto Elon Musk and his 5 closest friends. And guess what? Elon Musk and his 5 closest friends do not make enough money to pay for this. Right, so the problem is that not only is it a very bad way to spend charitable dollars, but if you just do some basic math, you realize that it is a call for a massive expansion in total amount of government spending. I've debated multiple people on this who have not done the basic math. To get in front of an audience of 300 people and just say, dude, we can totally afford it. It's like, this isn't like talking to your best friend and saying if you can drive a Mercedes, you could pay the toll on the freeway. It's nothing like this. This is like you think like you can intuit what billions and trillions of dollars are going to be like. No, you've got to really sit down and do that math. It's hard. It's like today I was just walking my son through the math of how many miles is a light year, right? And yeah, I think the answer turns out to be, it's in the quintillions, quintillions of miles, all right? But if you just go and ask people, say, how long do you think a light year really is? I don't know, like 1 million miles. Like, intuition is very bad for questions of numbers of this size, and so you really have to sit down and do the math. And so not only is it a very bad way to spend money, but the price tag is truly astronomical. So yeah, just a bad idea. What's better? The status quo is better than that. But I'd say like really better is if you're going to have redistribution, it should be the opposite of the UBI. It should be very strictly means tested. Only people who really need the money get it. That is the sensible way for charity to work.
Like a negative income tax?
Negative income tax is really the same as the UBI. It's all, mathematically, they're identical, actually. No. Much more different, like saying, like, are you an orphan? All right. Orphans are going to, or homeless orphans under the age of 15. That's one group that needs the money, right? Good group to target. Even better if they are war orphans living in a really poor country. That's a good group to target. All right. So, so people who are severely handicapped, very good group to target. Right. So that is the way that sensible redistribution works: is you actually find people who really would not be capable of taking care of themselves, and you help them out. Right? This is the way that sensible philanthropy works. It's the way that sensible government redistribution works, is that you go and find people who really are not capable of taking care of themselves, and you help them out.
All right. That'll be that. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. It's great. All right.